Commissioner Gordon. Bane has escaped.
You were taught to manage expectations, to aim small, to keep your hopes realistic so disappointment doesn't feel personal. But that doctrine was designed for the average, the fearful, the easily broken. You are not one of them. You do not need smaller goals. You need a larger tolerance for pain and faith. Expecting miracles is not delusion. It is a form of war. A declaration that says, even if this world has failed to show me magic, I will still plan as if it's coming. Most people demand evidence before they commit. They wait for signs that never come because they never moved. But the ones who win, they move first. They trust their madness. They execute with zero applause. They train for a stage that no one believes they'll reach, and in doing so, they summon the impossible, not because they're chosen, but because they chose themselves before anyone else dared to. The world bends to unreasonable belief, and when you expect miracles, you train your nervous system to override doubt. Your habits change. Your voice sharpens, your posture tightens, because you're not just preparing for possibility, you're preparing for inevitability. That's what belief does. Miracles don't descend, they get built. Brick by invisible brick, layer by painful layer, they arrive dressed as slow progress, quiet repetitions, unnoticed consistency. Most people miss them because they look for fireworks, but miracles don't make noise. They compound in silence. And by the time the world realizes what's happening, you've already crossed the line they said you'd never reach. You want a miracle? Then act like it's already yours. Structure your life like the outcome is guaranteed. Move like you're being watched by the future version of yourself who already made it. That version is real, but it only appears when you build the bridge. And the bridge is made of habits, not hope. Hope without structure is a lie, but belief, paired with execution, bends time. It shrinks years into months, weeks into days. The ones who expect miracles don't walk the same path. They skip steps because their mind has already lived in the result for so long that reality starts to chase them like a shadow. That's not optimism. That's alignment at scale. Cynicism will ask you to lower the bar, to match your vision with your surroundings. But vision was never meant to reflect your environment, it was meant to lead it. The more absurd your goal, the more real your system must become. That's the balance. Expect miracles, but back it with a daily rhythm that could terrify a machine. And no, this path isn't fair. You'll be laughed at, doubted, ignored, then envied, then copied. Because that's the arc of those who do what looks impossible. First they call you insane, then they call you lucky, then they call you a blueprint. And the only difference between your miracle and their excuse is that you kept moving when nothing moved around you. This is not about fantasy. This is about persistence so unreasonable that the world runs out of resistance. Every day you move with that belief, you write a new law into your identity, and that law becomes permanent when you stop asking for proof and become the proof. Expect miracles. Because the mind that sees the impossible as inevitable will always live a life the doubtful can't understand. And the universe will eventually catch up to those who made faith feel like law. Quantum theory doesn't guarantee anything, but it refuses to rule out the impossible. That alone should keep you dangerous. In the quantum world, the most improbable events never vanish. They hover, they wait. They linger at the edge of probability like soldiers uncalled. And while the rest of the world makes peace with what's likely, you become the outlier who includes the miracle in the equation, not because you're naive, but because your mind refuses to collapse into conformity. In quantum physics, every possibility remains real until observation collapses the wave. Translation: nothing is finalized until you look, until you declare, until you focus. The mind becomes the measurement. Belief, then, is not about magic. It's about choice. You can collapse your life into predictable failure, or you can observe possibility so consistently that it takes shape. You are not asking the universe to cheat the laws of nature. You are demanding that it respect the laws it already wrote. Because even in systems governed by cold probability, belief introduces bias. The observer matters. The experiment changes because someone dared to look differently. So when you expect miracles, you're not breaking rules, you're activating the margins. Every successful outlier, every so-called anomaly, existed because someone kept the door open. They didn't force a miracle. They refused to lock the gate against it. They kept moving, as if a breach in probability could open at any moment. They understood that discipline builds the container, but belief lets lightning strike. That's why people who believe irrationally often outperform those who play by reason. Because they're running a different operating system, one that sees uncertainty not as fear, but as fuel. They look at a 0.01% chance and think, perfect, that's all I need. Because in a quantum world, 0.01% still exists, and what exists can be aimed at. You want to bend time? You want to collapse decades into days? Then you need to build with the irrational faith that the unexplainable is waiting for you on the other side of repetition. That's the mindset. That's the charge. That's the particle-level recklessness required to step into a life that defies common sense. Every time you walk into the unknown with structure in your hand and belief in your chest, you change the landscape, you change the outcome, because you're moving with such violent consistency that the improbable has no choice but to adjust its posture. That's the pressure belief applies, not to the laws of physics, but to the timeline of arrival. Detractors will say, "Don't count on miracles." But they forget. You're not counting on them. You're including them in the model. You don't demand them. You make space for them, and that space becomes sacred. It becomes the room between probability and persistence, where insane outcomes get permission to show up. The miracle you're waiting for isn't outside the equation. It's been in it the whole time. You just never looked at it long enough. Never calculated past the doubt. Never waited past the boredom. But if you hold your gaze steady, if you keep building while the numbers say unlikely, the miracle starts to shift from optional to scheduled. You can't witness what you've already deemed impossible. That's not optimism, that's optics. The mind isn't just a receiver, it's a filter, and belief is the gatekeeper of what gets through. You don't perceive truth. You perceive what your mind allows you to expect. That's the tragedy of the rational thinker. He imagines himself as realistic, while his expectations screen out the extraordinary. He doesn't fail because miracles don't happen. He fails because he trained himself to never recognize one, even when it's screaming in his face. Expectation builds perception like scaffolding builds skyscrapers. You think you're seeing reality, but all you're really seeing is the world your mind was trained to find. Your belief system is a surveillance system, and most people have theirs tuned to the frequency of failure. That's why expecting a miracle isn't delusional, it's essential. Not because it guarantees the outcome, but because it tunes your perception to even spot the corridor where the extraordinary might be hiding. Children understand this. Naturally, they expect magic until the world drills it out of them. Then they become adults who only accept outcomes that fit their learned limits. Expectation gets domesticated. Hope becomes embarrassment. Vision gets repackaged as unrealistic. And by the time they hit 30, they don't just fear disappointment, they preload it into every ambition. So when something exceptional does appear, it feels like danger, because it wasn't on the list of allowed possibilities. What if your miracle showed up in the form of a new habit? A sudden opportunity, a pattern that didn't make sense at first. Would you recognize it, or would your beliefs delete it as an error in the code? This is the silent cost of low expectations, blindness. You live in a world bursting with potential, but you're walking through it with tinted glasses, crafted by culture, confirmed by comfort, reinforced by mediocre company. People who expect miracles see differently. Their field of awareness stretches past the obvious. They catch nuances, spot openings, anticipate shifts, not because they're clairvoyant, but because they've granted permission for the miraculous to show itself. And what you permit, you begin to prepare for. That preparation changes posture, it sharpens focus. It makes you more magnetic to the kind of chance that others call luck, but you know came from alignment. Delusion is expecting miracles without building the container. Discipline turns miracles into inevitability. But permission turns invisibility into visibility. You stop seeing scarcity, you start seeing strategy. You stop doubting your next move, you start rehearsing your next level. Because now you understand, the miracle doesn't show up to the unbelieving, not because it's cruel, but because it has no home in the mind that already closed the door. You've been conditioned to accept reasonable goals, reasonable expectations, reasonable lives. But miracles never arrive where reasonable is worshipped. They arrive where someone had the audacity to expect more. And when that expectation becomes a lifestyle, the miracle doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like recognition. When you start to expect miracles, your whole system adapts. Your words tighten, your circle shrinks, your rituals get deadly accurate. You stop playing for survival, you start staging for something rare. And suddenly, the impossible stops looking mythical. It starts looking logistical. Because you've removed the mental blocks that once called it impossible. You don't just live in a world, you live in a filtered version of it. That filter has a name, the reticular activating system. The RAS isn't optional. It's the part of your brain that decides what gets through and what gets ignored, and it doesn't obey logic. It obeys relevance. You train it every time you repeat what matters, what you expect, what you obsess over. And here's the twist. It doesn't care if what you obsess over is empowering or destructive. It just wants to know what to prioritize. That's why expectation is not innocent. It's the code that calibrates your visibility. You've felt this. Buy a new car and suddenly you see it everywhere. Think about a number all day and it shows up in receipts. These aren't miracles, these are proof of alignment. Your RAS is a searchlight, and what you set it to find, it finds. So when you expect miracles, your searchlight gets trained on possibility. You stop ignoring opportunities that used to hide in plain sight. You start catching patterns that the world dismissed as noise. The average person waits for signs, but the person who expects miracles constructs signs from subtle signals. Because now they're attuned. They hear a phrase that others shrug off, but they follow it. They notice timing coincidences, chance overlaps, repeated names, unusual energy shifts, not because they're mystical, but because their RAS has been sharpened by expectation so repeatedly it begins behaving like an internal compass pointing toward the miraculous. This is why miracles don't always look like miracles. They arrive dressed in ordinary detail. A phone call, a misfired email, a stranger saying the exact words you needed. The pattern doesn't scream, it taps. But if your expectation has trained your awareness, that tap is enough. You turn toward it, you listen. And when others call it luck, You'll smile knowing you didn't stumble, you saw it coming. What the world calls random, your brain learns to interpret as sequence. And that's what makes you dangerous. You begin collecting patterns, noticing repetitions, not just seeing connections, but forecasting them. You know when to wait, when to strike, when to walk, because your expectation trained your nervous system to become pattern literate. And a pattern literate mind is a mind that multiplies miracles. Most people miss this entirely. They treat expectation like fantasy. They think it's a mood, a temporary emotional high. But high performers know expectation is neural programming. And programming that gets repeated enough becomes biological law. Your RAS doesn't respond to wishes. It responds to instructions embedded with emotion and backed by behavior. So when you expect miracles and act accordingly, you aren't being idealistic, you're being neurologically efficient. This is why you must repeat the outcome, not to convince yourself, but to update your filters. The vision isn't repetition for motivation, it's a command to the reticular gatekeeper. Every image you rehearse sharpens the aperture, narrows the beam. You start missing less, you stop wandering, you lock on to specific trajectories, and suddenly, you're not chasing miracles, you're converging with them. And when it clicks, when the pattern connects, when the thread becomes a net, when you realize every miracle you experienced was once something you expected, repeated, and prepared for, that's when you stop using the word coincidence. Not because you deny complexity, but because you now understand that miracles reward those who train to perceive them. What you look for, you'll find. But what you're trained to find, you'll see first. And speed matters, because the first one to notice the opportunity is usually the one who owns it. That's why belief can't remain vague. It must be installed, visually, emotionally, strategically, until it becomes your default orientation toward the world. High-level operators don't believe because it feels good, they believe because hesitation costs blood. In combat, in business, in performance, timing is currency, and doubt taxes timing like nothing else. You pause for a second, reevaluate what's already been trained. That pause kills rhythm, kills instinct, kills advantage. And that's why belief isn't about positivity, it's about pre-mapping trust so the system moves before the mind second guesses. Watch an elite fighter. There's no maybe in their footwork, no hesitation in the strike. Why? Because they already expected it to land before they threw it. That's belief, tactical, grounded, biological. They've trained to remove mental delay. And when you remove delay, you get to the result faster than those still waiting for certainty. That's not confidence, that's operational efficiency. In high-stakes environments, there's no time to confirm. You act as if the win is inevitable, not because it is, but because doubt would kill your timing even if it were. Belief becomes a form of speed, a form of force. It makes your moves land harder because they're thrown with identity, not negotiation. The world doesn't slow down for your self-doubt, it runs over those who hesitate. You want results? Then you need belief as a weapon. Not just in your mind, but in your rituals, your breath, your pace, your tone. When you walk into a room expecting the win, you compress decision time. You execute with posture, not to fake it, but because your system has already mapped the outcome as real. You're not predicting. Doubt, on the other hand, is a form of self-betrayal. It sounds rational, thoughtful, but beneath it is fear that you might lose energy for nothing. So you delay, you aim smaller, you soften the pace. And in that hesitation, the door closes, the opportunity shifts, the opponent adjusts, and now you're fighting on their terms. That's the cost of internal fragmentation. Belief, when practiced, becomes automation. It lets you skip unnecessary processing and move with conviction before confirmation. You're no longer asking, what if it fails? You're rehearsing, how do I handle success when it arrives early? That mindset doesn't make you reckless, it makes you ready. You move like someone deserving of the outcome, and the world responds with congruence. People call it arrogance, until they see the system, the rehearsals, the reps. Then they call it inevitable. That's the arc of belief at scale. First you're mocked, then you're underestimated, then you're studied, but only because you trained your nervous system to believe before the scoreboard did. This is what separates the visionary from the bystander. Both feel fear, but the visionary executes through it because they've seen the miracle on the other side, not through hope, but through habit. And when your habits are aligned with belief, your outcomes stop arriving late. They start arriving on schedule. You don't need to fake certainty, you need to install operational belief. Not slogans, not mantras, execution presets. So when the moment arrives, you don't think, you move. You don't hesitate, you deploy. Belief is never silent. It has posture, tone, movement. It appears in the way you enter a room, not just in the words you say once you're inside. And the body knows the difference between borrowed confidence and cellular-level certainty. When you expect a miracle, not wish, not wonder, but expect, it updates everything from your breathing pattern to your word selection. People feel it before they hear it, and when the world feels belief radiating off your presence, it bends a little more than it did before. You've seen this in the eyes of closers. The calm before the pitch, the silence before the move. They don't rush, they don't apologize. Their timing has weight, not because they're louder, but because they've already walked through this in their mind. That's what expectation does. It stretches time. It sharpens delivery. It removes hesitation from speech because there's no nervous buffering, no pleading undertone, just execution designed to match what was already mentally rehearsed. When doubt governs expectation, your entire energy collapses, the shoulders curve forward, the voice flattens, the pace quickens from anxiety. You try to convince instead of command. You start adding disclaimers to your words, apologies in your tone, subtext that screams, "I'm not sure this will land." That's how doubt rewrites language, by draining identity out of communication. But when you expect miracles, you remove the apology. You stop asking for permission with your posture. Your back straightens, not because you forced it, but because your nervous system has been told to prepare for victory, and it listens. Your hands stop fidgeting. Your pauses gain gravity. Even your walk changes, less about speed, more about presence. This is why your expectations are never just mental. They're mechanical. They shape how you move through the room, how long you hold eye contact, how quickly you recover when things go off script. Because belief is a framework the body follows, and when that framework is set to, "I'm here to win," you don't panic when resistance shows up. Even in silence, expectation leaks. It's in your micro-expressions, your transitions, the exact second you begin to speak. Are you bracing for rejection or anticipating traction? The answer bleeds through you, and the world responds not to what you intend, but to what you embody. This is what makes high performers look effortless. They're not more talented, they're more aligned. Their internal vision has been burned so clearly into their system that their tone and timing no longer contradict their desire. There's no gap between what they believe and how they act. And that congruence creates impact, because it creates coherence. If your voice stutters but your words say, "I'm confident," The body wins. If your body shrinks but your speech says, "I'm ready," the nervous system betrays you. The brain hears posture first, and the world is no different. It responds to what you radiate before it hears what you say. So if your expectation hasn't shaped your tone, your outcome hasn't begun. The miracle doesn't begin when the world agrees with your vision. It begins when you embody it so fully that the room forgets to question you. When your tone arrives before your logic, when your rhythm convinces before your data, when your belief precedes explanation.